The Game Boy Advance was 17 times faster than the Game Boy Color and was the third handheld released by Nintendo. Its graphics were comparable to the Super Nintendo, so it's no surprise that GBA was extremely successful, selling over 81 million units worldwide. And with this success came a huge library of games that many are still playing today. So in this video, we're going to go over a handful of GBA games that you need to try out. Starting off with Starfy III. Sadly, this game never came to North America, but I'm going to include it because you don't need to speak Japanese to play it. Starfy is a platformer that I only discovered once it hit the DS, but the original GBA games are also really good, and Starfy 3 definitely offers a lot for those that enjoy platformers. The core game has you playing as Starfy, who is on a quest to stop an underwater monster named Ogura. The story isn't much, but the gameplay is a ton of fun and it takes inspiration from games like Super Mario and Kirby. Starfy is able to run on land while performing spin attacks, and he can also move freely around in certain water areas. There's a ton of collectibles and enemies to defeat, along with a small array of mini games, so if you like platformers, I'd say definitely check this one out. Coming in next we have Wario Land 4. This game is impossible to avoid if you own a GBA, and that's for good reason. Many consider Wario Land 4 to be the best platformer on the handheld, and while I can't speak to that, I will say it's a good game. In terms of the story, there isn't all that much here, just Wario falling down a pyramid trying to escape. The gameplay feels like a mix of Sonic and Metroid while maintaining that Mario platforming. Wario is capable of attacking enemies and knocking them over, where you get to use them as throwables to solve different puzzles. One of the big selling points for Wario Land 4 is that whenever Wario is attacked by an enemy, he gains their power. An example of this is when Wario gets stung by a bee, he puffs up and is able to float to otherwise unreachable areas. To me, this is a cool aspect of the game and it definitely kept me playing, so if you're in the market for a quirky platformer with a lot of charm, Wario Land 4 is one to get. Next up is Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire. This one is more than just a pinball game because it combines the typical Pokemon formula of catching pocket monsters and it puts a nice twist on it. There's two tables, one for Ruby and one for Sapphire, and each offer their own set of Pokemon to catch. As expected, each Pokemon has their own stats and can be caught by being hit 3 times to capture it. There's also some small mini games that pull you away from the main playfield and they let you fight much larger Pokemon. You also get to catch baby Pokemon from eggs, which is a cool little concept. So overall, this game is more on the simple side, but for a Pokemon fan, there's a lot of content here. So if you enjoy catching pocket monsters, I'd for sure recommend this one. Coming up next is Car Battler Joe. This game has gotten a lot more popular in recent time, but back in the day, I don't think many people knew about it. Car Battler Joe is an action racing RPG that flows nicely with the Mad Max aesthetic. The storyline is centered around finding your father, who is supposedly the best car battler in the world, and to do this you're gonna have to explore and battle other cars. But luckily the car battles are quite easy, as you get to move around and use different special moves along with overdrive skills. Visually, the game looks fantastic and it takes full advantage of that Mode 7 feature on the GBA. Car Battler Joe also offers a very intuitive crafting system and always gives you a nice sense of progression, so if you're looking for a GBA game that's a little different, this is the one to get. And next is Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. When this game released, it was met with a lot of negative feedback, as people were pretty divided on whether or not this was a good Kirby game because it introduced a lot of new things to the series. But leaping forward 20 years, I think people were a little hard on it. The game's not perfect, but it's still a fun GBA game that has some really nice pixel art. The game's premise is that Kirby has to collect 8 fragments across the mirror world, and he has to do this just by completing levels. But this is where Amazing Mirror shakes things up a bit because it falls away from that linear traditional Kirby formula and it instead goes for a more Metroidvania style. Kirby will be solving puzzles, defeating enemies, and collecting items to acquire new abilities which allow Kirby to explore new areas. It's a simple premise, but it's definitely a lot of fun, especially if you take advantage of the multiplayer mode in this game. So while this wasn't the Kirby game everyone wanted, I'd still recommend it as a good platformer. And up next, Max Payne. I'm a big fan of the Max Payne series and I never thought I'd see it come to the Game Boy Advance. And although I would have expected it to not be that great, the developers did a really good job at bringing the classic Max Payne formula to a 32-bit handheld. The game follows the story of Max Payne, who is framed for a murder he didn't commit, and it has you killing mobsters as you try to find evidence that will clear your own name. In terms of gameplay, Max Payne is an action shooter that plays off of one core mechanic: bullet time. This mechanic makes it so you can slow down time and dive to shoot enemies, and it makes for some pretty cool moments. Also, another benefit to this game is that it has some of the best audio on the GBA, so definitely keep that in mind if you decide to pick this one up. And next is Disney's Lilo and Stitch. This game almost didn't release because Disney felt it was too violent and didn't fit their family image, but luckily they made an exception and they delivered a great run and gun that strongly resembles games like Metal Slug and Alien Hominid. The game takes place after the first movie and has Lilo abducted by an alien mosquito, which leaves Stitch to run and gun his way through enemies to rescue her. Gameplay wise, this one has you switching between both characters doing stealth missions with Lilo and then run and gun ones with Stitch. There's a good amount of variety in this game as it has you solving puzzles and then flying through space, so if you enjoy running guns and you want a game that's under $10, Lilo and Stitch is a really good one to own. Coming in next we have Golden Sun. If you're into RPGs, then I'm sure you've heard about this game, but that's because it truly is one of the best RPGs on the handheld. Now with all that said, this game does have a very slow start. The developers of Golden Sun really wanted to create a deep story, and they did that by beginning the game with a pretty slow pace, which might turn some people away, but if you stick with it, you'll be happy you did. The story is that you are a group of idiots who must prevent the destructive power of alchemy being released. To do this, you're going to have to travel around the game and solve puzzles, kill enemies, and complete assigned missions given to you. The core gameplay of Golden Sun is its combat, and there's a lot of variety about how you use strategies to win battles. So if you enjoy RPGs and you want a visually stunning game on the GBA, Golden Sun is definitely one to get. And last but not least, we have Metroid Fusion. I saved this game for last, but I did it for a very good reason, because Metroid Fusion is hands down my favorite title on the Game Boy Advance because it does such an excellent job at bringing suspense and horror onto such a tiny handheld screen. In Metroid Fusion, Samus arrives at the BSL station where she's investigating an explosion, and she soon realizes that parasites have created a full power copy of her. This creates a really cool cat and mouse dynamic where Samus is running from her clone as she attempts to figure out what's going on. Through this, she gets to fight some incredible bosses and acquire a lot of fun abilities that help you progress. Overall, the game looks amazing, it controls great, and it has music that adds to the entire atmosphere. Metroid Fusion is a top-notch platformer that every single Game Boy Advance owner should have, so if you haven't tried this one, you really should. And well, that wraps up this list for now. Down the road, I'll definitely make some more GBA videos, most likely hidden gem ones, so if you've got some games to recommend me, please let me know down in the comments as I'll definitely give them a try. And with that said, I just want to say a massive thank you for watching this far. Please subscribe as it really helps my channel grow, and I will see you in the future.